made us come down here. You encouraged her. Now look where we are. Between Danik shooting at us and whatever the fuck that was, what chance have we got?
It's time to stop! It's time to stop, okay? No more!
Dead Space 3. My journey with this game started almost 5 years ago, back in 2018, when I managed to snag this game for free with backwards compatibility on Xbox. I hadn't played any of the other Dead Space games at that time, and I thought, why not start at the third for the hell of it? I started playing and got about 2 hours in, and then, for some reason, I feel like I remember I got stuck at one point and just decided to stop playing, and the rest is history. Fortunately and unfortunately for me, history rewrote itself, and I found myself replaying the game over again in order to complete the full trilogy of all Dead Space games. A franchise in which I fully completed every single game, including the remake, in the span of about 2 months, going back to December 23rd up until March 3rd, when I fully finished the third game. Personally, I find that to be a major accomplishment on my own, considering I've never completed 4 video games in that amount of time. I played every aspect of each game, from the story to, yes, even the multiplayer mode that was in Dead Space 2, which is still alive and kicking. But obviously that's not what we are here to discuss. Dead Space 3, the final chapter of my Dead Space playthroughs and time with the franchise, has come to an end, and I want to talk about it here. I mainly want to talk about why, as you could tell by the thumbnail and title of this video, I was confused but yet satisfied with this game at the same time. A video game that I really do truly believe was very close to perfecting this entire trilogy of the franchise. It just unfortunately took a lot of missteps that I think are worth giving some thought into. For everyone out there who has played Dead Space 3 and wants to chime in, please do down below in the comments. What did you think about this game and what I will eventually have to say here in my video? Of course, spoilers moving forward, so you've been warned if you haven't played the game. So as we jump into this retrospective of sorts, let's start off with the background. The game begins with a flashback to 2 centuries before the main timeline, where an outbreak happened on the main planet of Tau Volantis, where a military team tried to extract a codex. Things go awry and in brutal fashion, and it basically sets the stage for what is to come with the main plot as we move forward into the present. We now jump right in with our main man Isaac Clarke, as he is currently hiding away on an Earth colony on the moon. We immediately figure out that it looks like he and Ellie, who we fought together with in the second game, have split up after getting together sometime after the second game ended. Which, by the way, for the record, why is it that at the very beginning here, Isaac is able to pick up his plasma cutter gun, and then when he gets it kicked away by Carver and Norton, he just doesn't think to get it back, but yet takes this unbelievably worst piece of shit gun to use? It was almost like having that feeling of EA and Visceral Games telling you that you weren't going to get that back and that they are going in a different direction. A direction in which really put them in a bad spot, but we'll get to that soon. So basically, you are tasked with going and finding Ellie, who is on a very important mission while this Earth colony on the moon is getting invaded by unitologist terrorists who set off a marker, and Necromorph uprising happens to be taking place in the entire colony. So right off the bat, immediately, you actually have a pretty decent start to this game, and it just puts you right into the action. It doesn't waste your time. Once you get off that Earth colony, you are on your way to the planet of Tau Volantis, where you encounter a bunch of ships in a graveyard who are orbiting the planet and the moon. This is essentially where the game fully kicks off, and you get into the main crux of the story. A story in which I do want to talk about now, because for a lot of people who I've seen talk about the game, this has been the biggest issue that they've had with it. I think if I were to be honest as possible about this game's story, I think I would like to start off by saying this. Overall, when it comes to the science fiction nature of what the story is going for here, I think they nailed it. I think everything that is in the game is perfect from that standpoint. It's just that how everything was executed just didn't line up that well. Of course, if it wasn't apparent enough, this game moved away from its horror roots from the first two and turned into a full-on science fiction action-adventure game with minor elements of horror sprinkled throughout. I could definitely look at the first Dead Space game as the alien of the franchise, and then Dead Space 3 as the aliens of them all. And then the second game I think is like a mix of both. It focused on horror when it needed to, and action when it needed to, which is why a lot of people think the second is the best in the franchise. It is a diversion that I think took balls, but in the end is where I ultimately found most of my satisfaction. I know there are people who probably wish that the game stuck to its roots based on its tone, but I actually didn't mind that it took this diversion because in the end I did enjoy playing it. Admittedly, I do wish that they did more with the horror side of things, but this is what we ended up getting. You essentially are tasked with finding the origin of the markers and how everything started so that you can fully stop it from destroying humanity once and for all. It is essentially the final chapter to this entire story, which makes sense because I imagine they probably back in the day thought it would end with a trilogy, which is also why I imagine that they thought about making this the longest game in the franchise with 19 chapters for around 12 and a half hours of gameplay. And for the record, I'll say it right now because this will be my first criticism of the game. It is way too damn long. The story just finds a way to drag so many times throughout, and that really hurts the pacing. I think that it is also a perfect segue to talk about the elephant in the room, which is that goddamn awful love triangle.
Isaac.
Isaac, you made it.
Thank God.
I knew you'd catch up.
Good to see you made it, Isaac. Maybe we should give you two some time alone, huh?
What the hell does that mean?
It means for someone who's in the past, you're awfully glad to see him.
We need him. This mission needs
Come on,
him.
we need him or you need him?
Hey, you got something to say to me, Captain?
Stop. Just stop.
You're a fucking idiot. This needs to stop. Now.
Yes, my fellow Dead Space fans, I am with you on this one. This storyline is so bad and so unnecessarily dragged out to the point where I legitimately thought to myself, I think Nicole is really loving being dead right about now. Obviously, that's a joke, but I think she would even agree that this is ridiculous. The fact that we spent so much time between Norton and Isaac having a dick measuring contest to see who gets with the girl the most had me rolling my eyes every single time. Which, by the way, I understand why they're having that fight, but come on guys, you have bigger fish to fry. Also, if it wasn't obvious, her choice of clothing is not realistic in any matter, so just a heads up, if this game ever gets made into a remake, she's not going to be wearing that. Like, straight up. Isaac's reaction to every first scene of him seeing those two together had me laughing because his face is my exact reaction to every time that plotline comes back. He just doesn't know what to say. Thankfully, though, this storyline ends in a very satisfying way that any one person could easily have predicted would have happened. Also, if you thought that was predictable, wait till you see some of the rest of the game. There are so many times where you can definitely predict where things are going, and that doesn't necessarily ruin it a lot of the time, but it did kind of take away from the expectation of how I was going to feel when experiencing certain events. A death, for example, with a character like Santos, who I can't for the life of me understand why it would take so long to just get off an elevator shaft. Like, seriously, what is taking you so long? And now you're dead. It was just things like that that had me kind of rolling my eyes, even if it didn't necessarily ruin anything major. The main antagonists of the game, other than the Necromorphs, in the terrorist group that you constantly fight are sort of generic in terms of science fiction standards. There's not much to them other than they are trying to stop what's coming, and their head leader, Danik, is certainly a piece of work. The man kills for the sake of killing and wanting to kill, and the man who also acts like a very cartoony villain for the sake of acting like a cartoony villain. I mean, it kind of did get a little ridiculous at points. It's like, clearly Isaac and him see differently on how things should be handled, but no one ever for the sake of it actually tries to go about the right way of doing it and understand each other's sides. You constantly just keep throwing insults back at each other and it resorted to nothing. In terms of the actual characters themselves, I don't particularly have too many negative things to say about each one other than what has been said already. I actually don't mind the fact that you are constantly working together with others to figure out how to get through the mission. The character of Carver, for example, is also very interesting because, I'll be fully honest, I never in a million years thought that that particular character would be the final one that Isaac Clarke is with on screen by the time that he dies at the end. At the same time, I almost found him to be such a much more compelling character than some of the others, for example. I mean, since the guy had a much better story behind him, and he now wants to correct it by saving humanity. Also, let's be honest here. The guy's got a pretty dope-looking suit. A suit that is definitely up there with the military suit from the original Dead Space game in terms of its cool factor. Also, just in case I missed something, how exactly does Carver die at the end? Am I crazy, or is he the only one out of the two who actually still has his helmet, so he could survive in space? Unless he just got hit by a giant rock floating through and it just pummeled him. Isaac doesn't even have his, so clearly he's dead, so again, how is he alive? Let me know down below in the comments. I liked Ellie's character in this game. She is one that is stubborn at first in the second game when you meet her, but you eventually get around to working together well enough. Here in this game, obviously you have the stupid love triangle, but in the end, she's a character who has a mission and is focused on it, regardless of the feud between Isaac and Norton. In the end, with her being the last remaining person alive, I felt like it actually kind of made sense, considering she was the only one left ill-equipped to not even be in the fight in the first place. Finally, with the character of Norton, I'll just say it up front, I don't like this character at all. I think his character is horribly written and just comes off as a complete dickbag for no reason after you first meet him. I think the voice acting in particular is not very good, no offense to the actor, and I also think he wasn't given good direction by the game director either. That's another thing that this game has issues with, is that its game direction is pretty messy and all over the place, and it's very noticeable throughout. Finally, in terms of the story, it shouldn't go without saying, but the end of the game is just balls to the wall insanity. I mean, it is some of the most unrealistic but yet really cool shit you'll play against in a video game. I mean, seriously, you literally fight and kill a moon. You fight and kill a goddamn necromorph moon.
Oh, fuck yeah, this is the shit!
I mean, seriously, how cool is that? And at the same time, with every boss that you fought already in the previous two games, and in this game already, it just makes sense that this would be the end fight to end all fights against the Necromorphs. I mean, you fight a giant hive mind alien multiple times. You fight off a giant golden heart that is psychologically inside of your own head. And then finally, to end all fights, you literally go up against a moon in space. I mean, talk about upping the ante every single time. If there is one thing I'll give this franchise, it is that it really did find clever ways to make each boss more interesting than the previous. Fighting off this moon, while it was very easy and a simple boss fight, which was probably too easy, I did find that it was very fascinating to actually experience. Once you defeat it, the game ends with you and Carver sacrificing yourselves to have defeated the moon from heading to Earth, and we see that Ellie gets no response from either, and she space jumps back to Earth. The only thing left remaining, which was after the credits, was a little subtle tease of Isaac.
Ellie? Ellie.
So does this mean that, canonically, in the main game story, that Isaac could still be alive? I'm curious to know how most people would interpret that tease at the end, especially since if he drifted off into space after killing the moon, how exactly did he survive? Did he find just a randomly floating helmet around for him to put on? Again, it's all up to interpretation, I guess, but that's officially the ends of the story portion of this video. And again, I'll be curious to know what everyone's thoughts were on that. I do think, though, that that last tease is maybe the most horrifying part of the game, because just knowing that you might be floating in space all alone for no one to ever hear you again, that's pretty terrifying. I'll give it that. Now it is time to go into some of the gameplay mechanics and systems with the game. I don't think there's any better way than to start off with the benches. I, for the life of me, cannot begin to understand why this system was changed. Dead Space 1 and 2 had the perfect system for how to upgrade your weapons and how to handle all your resources that you carried with you. There is no better description for these benches than to describe them as being one of the most overly convoluted systems I've ever played with in a video game. And to be clear, I don't mean that in the sense that I was totally confused as to what I was supposed to be doing with it. I mean it's convoluted in the sense that it was just too much. You have weapon crafting, weapon blueprints, with upgrades like how the note system worked in the original 2 games, only it's smaller here, and then you have the store and the safe, which are the usual. It is the crafting and blueprint systems that I simply do not understand why they needed to be the way they were. I liked the way that it was in the old games, where it was simple and not overstuffed. Here you were offered so many different blueprints for weapons, and speaking of those weapons, why would you only have 2 different kinds of guns to use? I get the purpose of these 2 guns is that you can make your own kind of weapon out of both of them, which is cool in concept, but again, the original weapons that you had in the first 2 games are so iconic and also so fun to use to the point where it feels unnecessary that you have to do this at all. And also, for most of these blueprints, you can't even get most of them until you get a New Game Plus because you need a crap ton of resources to build them. And you already are allocating so many of those other resources to so many other things that you're already trying to upgrade. The new resource system in this game is actually one that I didn't mind and I thought was actually pretty intuitive for this franchise. Rather than just having credits to pay for stuff you actually have to pay with, all these different types of resources that have their own unique currency for that type of thing you want to buy, it's pretty cool, I'll be honest with that. But okay, wait, can I just say this though? Because, dear God man, this was such a stupid decision. Why in the hell would you only make one ammo type? I mean, seriously, again, you had a perfectly fine system in the first 2 games for the ammo types. I do not know for the life of me why they had to make only one type of ammo. It doesn't make any logical sense. So I'll include that in there as well, and I'm sure a lot of other people also feel the same way as I do. The same thing also applies to the suit machine, where you get your new suit. And speaking of those suits, I have to say, while I like that they tried to do something different with the style of suits, I ultimately only ever found myself wearing the classic Arctic survival suit that the game was advertised with. I just think it looked the coolest, and at the same time, when you're on a snow-covered planet, it seemed like the only feasible one to wear. At the same time, they also took out the inventory to suit combo, to where every time you get a new suit, it adds to your inventory slots. The suit machine also has its own upgrade system, which I actually think is a much better system than what the benches were going for. It's simple and to the point. With regards to the kinesis and stasis style of gameplay, I think they were very fun here to use in this game. I like the fact that because you are involved in so many areas of much older technology than what someone like Isaac Clarke is used to, you actually have to get used to that style and accommodate yourself to that old technology. For example, instead of just opening doors by pressing A in the game, you actually have to use your kinesis to physically turn the handles on doors because they are so old. It's a little added extra details like that that I appreciate about what they added into the world. Although, that being said, I can't help but not be a little annoyed by the fact that even though environmentally a lot of what you experience in the game is based off an old era of technology in terms of things like the doors, the ships, and the buildings, I like that I can't be the only one who thought it was very weird that the guns you used in this game felt like they were also of an older time, even though you could easily have just used the guns of that era. Like, the starting machine gun you get feels like a weapon that was 200 years older than something like the pulse rifle from the first 2 games, or any of the other guns that you get in that first Dead Space game. I mean, I don't know, I think that might be a nitpick on my end, but in terms of the aesthetic of this timeline, I just wish that they kept it more consistent. And environmentally speaking, yet again, I think the environments in this game are also very well made. I like how expansive this game is in terms of the many different locations that you go to, whether it's the spaceship graveyard in orbiting the planet and the moon itself, or the planet. I like that there are many different types of environments that you travel to, so that's another good thing I'll give this game. Moving on to the Necromorphs, I thought this was another good area of the game. When it comes to the entire franchise of all 3 games, I genuinely believe that the Necromorphs have been handled with a lot of care and detail, which of course is important because they are the enemies that you are constantly fighting. I really like that this game took strides to come up with new types of Necromorphs while also giving you a flavor of some of the more general ones that you are used to. You get something like a spider necromorph, or a new necromorph called the Feeder, which is a blind, decrepit corpse of a human who, if you make any noise, Tons of them will come out of nowhere and just swarm you, which is very terrifying. I really do love that this game has a vast diversity in the styles of Necromorphs and the number of them. And of course, with the final one being the Moon Necromorph, there's nothing more I can really say. That was just a really cool design, and something that makes sense in terms of what could have been the last possible thing for Isaac to fight. And again, while it was a little too easy to fight it, I did enjoy the participation in fighting it. I don't think I've talked about him too much already, but I think you can probably tell from how I've talked about him so far that the character of Isaac Clarke here is just fantastic. Again, I will never get over the fact that the first game just did a disservice to him by not giving him a voice. When he has the ability to talk, he's just vomiting great character building, and also just gives you the ability to want to love him because he's a guy that wants to do the right thing and help as many people as possible, regardless if he's just an engineer. The scene after he couldn't save Santos showcases that very aspect to his character very nicely, and I felt like this game tied up his character very well in terms of his overall arc. I know some people would have loved to have seen him live at the end, but I think it made sense that he would go out the way he did. Overall, I definitely think that having now played this franchise, I think the character of Isaac Clarke deserves to have that iconic status to his name. I think with the addition of that remake as well, it really bolstered that. Regardless of how I felt about that love triangle in this game between his character and Norton and Ellie, I still appreciate that he kept his humility, which is why I am kindly asking that we get a remake for the second and third game, because not only was the first one very good and damn near a masterpiece, but I think it would put a stamp on this franchise as being one of the more iconic ones of all time, as long as they are done correctly. So with all of that being said, I think we have come to the final stage of this video, which is to talk about my final thoughts and impressions, as well as give my thoughts on whether or not I'd want to see a remake. Firstly, I want to say up front, I don't hate this game, but I think it was definitely disappointing in a lot of areas to where I feel that I can only sit here and say that the game was just decent at best. I don't usually give scores to games, at least not anymore, but if I had to give this game a score, it would be at a minimum a 6.5 out of 10, and then at a maximum maybe a 7 out of 10, but again, that's a generous 7 out of 10 with all the issues that I had with the game. In terms of the first two games, I would easily give both of those either a 9 or a 9.5. Those two games are just really good, even though I did have a lot of issues with the last third act of the second game. Again, there is a lot to love here in this game, but there's also a lot that I simply just couldn't ignore with some of my annoyances and frustrations. To also answer the question of whether or not I would want to see a remake of this game, I think I can say on record that I would absolutely want to see that, but it would take a lot to go into it. Obviously, they still need to remake the second game before that happens, and they would have to sit down and have a good, well-thought-out meeting on what they would have to change in this game in order to make it feel more like the original two. I'm not saying you have to totally change everything, but with what worked in this game, you obviously have to keep that. The first remake for the first game did something like with regards to the asteroid mission, for example, where instead of going down the boring route of what the original did, they actually made a change to make it feel more lived in for an experience for the player. It's things like that that I think a studio like Motive would understand, which is why I would trust them to be the ones to remake the final two games like they did the first. At the same time, I would also hope that EA doesn't pull too many strings from the studio when they would make it, because I did end up finding that EA did meddle with the game's development, which is not surprising considering the game's creative director had said that it was eroded by their business interests. They had wanted to delve more deeper into Isaac Clarke's psychosis, and the game had also featured microtransactions, which was all from EA. While I am on the side of the developers in that the microtransactions should not have been in this game in the first place, I do think that having played the second game, it was probably time to move on from the whole Isaac Clarke psychosis plot. I felt like the second game tied that up nicely, and to have delved into it more probably would have meddled with that. I'm not saying you couldn't have done anything with that, but to have made that the focus probably would not have been the best route to take. So to any upcoming game developers out there who want to be on the business side of things, this is a lesson to take, and do not meddle with the creative process with regards to putting in money-like decisions that hurt that process. If I was running a company like that, the minds of the creators would always come first and business last, because I know deep down if my game is going to make money, which most of the time it would, it's going to be because the creatives have a good vision for it. We don't see that too often nowadays, where you see a lot of online multiplayer type games games, for example, that are just eroded with corporatized decisions and the creatives being put last. The new Suicide Squad game, for example, coming out is one of those examples of that in terms of a single-player perspective. That game is pretty much dead on release as of right now because of the fact that it just feels like a corporate and soulless husk of a game. But that's a rant for another conversation, and I just want to get that out since it does tie into Dead Space 3.
No. Wait.
I really do think that with those critiques in mind and the business decisions that were made that negatively affected it, this game was truly that close to being great and perfecting this trilogy. I think with all that being said, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of my retrospective on Dead Space 3. Again, I just want to say for the experience that I had in the last 2 months playing this franchise and all of its games, I really did have a good time. It was an experience that I think was well worth it in the end and a good change of pace from my gaming style since I am more of a multiplayer gamer than a single player kind of guy. And so it's changed my view on how I want to go about gaming in my future. There are so many other different franchises that I want to dive into that I haven't played. For example, the next one up on my list that I managed to snag the entire trilogy for remastered for a good price is the BioShock franchise. I have all the games downloaded, and at some point down the line, maybe in the next several months, I am going to start up my playthrough of that series. I don't know if I'll make any videos on it, but I'm just really glad that the Dead Space games are giving me this ability to want to go and actually play it for the first time. I think I can firmly say it here that this franchise is awesome, and again, I do hope that we get remakes for the last 2 games because it is definitely warranted and deserved. I hope whoever works on them takes their time, and if I have to wait 4 to 5 years to get both, I don't care, I'll still play them. But I think the most important thing of all to come from this video that I want to go into are your thoughts, not just on Dead Space 3 as a whole, but on my video and what I had to say. I think my retrospective can hopefully bring a newer conversation for this game, especially now that we have gotten that remake. I've seen a lot of different retrospectives and reviews made about this game that came out before we got that remake, and I think hopefully I can shed some new light on it. So again, please comment down below all of that, and if you did enjoy this video, please drop it a like. I would greatly appreciate it. I spent a lot of time making this video and created a 9-page script out of it. And subscribe to my YouTube channel if you are new here. Again, that would greatly be appreciated. I'm going through a bit of a weird time right now with this channel, and I'm trying to figure out what I want to upload again moving forward. So I hope whoever here that's already subscribed can just stick with me for the time being. Life is crazy for me with work and school, and I'm trying to go through it all as best as I can while working on this channel. So again, I hope you all enjoyed, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your days. Be safe out there, and enjoy whatever it is that you are currently gaming on. This is Orion, and I'm signing out.